In November of 1717, roughly 100 miles off the coast of Martinique, a French slave ship called La Concorde was limping through the Caribbean with over 500 captured Africans crammed below deck. 16 of her crew had already died from disease. Another 36 were too sick to stand. The ship was crawling, barely making headway, when two sloops appeared on the horizon, flying black flags. The pirates didn't even need to board. They fired 2 volleys, and Captain Pierre Doucet surrendered. The man who stepped onto that deck, Edward Teach, the pirate the world would come to know as Blackbeard, looked at this broken, disease-ridden slave ship and saw something nobody else would have seen. He saw the skeleton of a warship. He saw a vessel that, with the right modifications, could become the most feared machine on the Atlantic Ocean. And over the next several months, that is exactly what he built. Now, if you pull out a map of the Atlantic world in the early 1700s, you can trace the path this ship traveled before Blackbeard ever touched it. Start in Nantes, France, a port city on the Loire River that had become the beating heart of the French slave trade. That is where a wealthy merchant named René Montaudoin owned and operated La Concorde, a 3-masted frigate measuring roughly 100 feet from bow to stern and 28 feet across the beam. From Nantes, the ship would have sailed south along the coast of Europe, past Portugal, past the Canary Islands, down to the western coast of Africa. There, hundreds of captured men, women, and children were forced aboard and packed into holds just 12 feet deep. Then the ship would cross the Atlantic, following the trade winds west toward Martinique, where the enslaved would be sold. This was the Middle Passage, one of the most brutal chapters in human history, and La Concorde made this crossing at least 3 times before Blackbeard intercepted her on the 3rd voyage. But to understand why Blackbeard wanted this particular ship, and why his modifications turned it into one of the most effective weapons of the Golden Age of Piracy, you need to understand what French shipwrights were building in the early 1700s. Because La Concorde was not some clunky cargo barge. She was a purpose-built light frigate, and that distinction changes everything about this story. French naval architecture at the turn of the 18th century was, by most accounts, the finest in Europe. The British had bigger fleets. The Dutch had better cargo ships. But the French built frigates that were faster, sleeker, and more maneuverable than anything else on the water. Their shipwrights understood something that sounds obvious now, but was a genuine breakthrough for the era. A warship did not need to be the biggest vessel in the fight. It needed to be the fastest. French frigates were designed with narrower beams relative to their length, sharper waterlines at the bow, and lighter construction overall compared to the boxy, heavily timbered ships coming out of English and Dutch yards. La Concorde was almost certainly built this way. Archaeological evidence recovered from the wreck site confirms French construction methods, specifically in the fastening patterns used to secure the hull planks to the frames. French shipwrights used a distinct pattern of iron bolts and wooden treenails that differed noticeably from English or Dutch practices of the same period. Those construction details, still visible in the timbers pulled from the ocean floor off the coast of North Carolina, are part of what helped archaeologists eventually confirm the identity of the wreck nearly 300 years later. La Concorde displaced roughly 200 tons and was armed with between 24 and 26 guns when she operated as a privateer during Queen Anne's War. That conflict, which ran from 1701 to 1714, pitted France against England across multiple theaters, and Montaudoin used La Concorde to raid English shipping under a letter of marque. When the war ended, he converted her back into a slave ship. The French Navy briefly reacquired the vessel in late 1716, then sold her again just 5 months later, once more for use in the slave trade. By the time Blackbeard captured her, the ship had already lived multiple lives, each one leaving its mark on the hull, the rigging, and the overall condition of the vessel. When Blackbeard took possession, he immediately began a transformation that reveals just how well he understood naval engineering and tactical warfare. The first and most dramatic change was the armament. La Concorde carried roughly 24 to 26 guns in her French configuration. Blackbeard nearly doubled that number, bringing the total to 40 cannons. A newspaper account from 1718 describes the Queen Anne's Revenge as a large ship, had 40 guns and 300 men. To put that in perspective, most pirate vessels of this era were sloops carrying maybe 8 to 12, guns and crews of 50 to 70. Blackbeard was not building a pirate ship, he was building a floating fortress. But here is where the engineering gets interesting. You cannot simply bolt 40 cannons onto a ship that was designed to carry 26. The weight alone would be catastrophic. Each cannon weighed anywhere from several hundred pounds to over a ton. Add the gun carriages, the ammunition, the powder stores, and the structural reinforcement needed to absorb the recoil of firing, and you are looking at tons of additional weight that the hull was never designed to carry. When archaeologists recovered cannons from the wreck site beginning in the late 1990s, they discovered something remarkable. The cannons were a hodgepodge collection from different countries, different time periods, and different manufacturing traditions. Some came from England, others came from Sweden. Before we go any further, I need to stop for a second, because what I've been showing you in these videos only scratches the surface. And I realized at some point that the full picture, the actual pirate code, word for word, the real punishment records, the exact treasure division shares, the ports that secretly funded them, it doesn't fit in a video. I put it all into one document, the Black Flag Codex. It's linked below, and the QR code is on your screen. Now, let's keep going. The dates of manufacture ranged from approximately 1640 all the way to 1714. 9 of the recovered cannons were found still loaded, ready to fire, which tells you something about the constant state of readiness Blackbeard maintained aboard his ship. This mismatched artillery collection was not a sign of desperation. It was actually standard practice for pirates, who sourced their weapons from captured vessels, raids on port towns, and black market deals throughout the Caribbean. But it created a genuine engineering challenge. Different cannons had different bore sizes, which meant different ammunition. Different weights, which meant different recoil forces. Different lengths, which affected range and accuracy. Managing this arsenal required a crew that understood not just how to fire a cannon, but how to compensate for the unique characteristics of each individual weapon. The process of mounting these guns would have required significant structural modification to the ship. Gun ports would need to be cut into the hull at precise intervals. The deck beams beneath each gun position would need reinforcement to handle the shock of firing. The ship's center of gravity would shift with every cannon added, and if you got it wrong, the vessel would become top-heavy and capsize in rough seas. Blackbeard clearly understood these risks, because the Queen Anne's Revenge continued to sail and fight effectively throughout his 7-month command. Now, consider the hull itself. La Concorde was built with oak, as most European warships of this period were. The keel, which is the structural backbone running along the bottom of the ship from bow to stern, was a single massive timber, or a series of timbers, scarfed together with precision joints. The frames, which are the ribs of the ship, rose up from the keel and gave the hull its shape. Planks were fastened to the outside of these frames to form the watertight skin of the vessel. French shipwrights were known for using a combination of iron nails, bolts, and wooden tree nails in their fastenings, and the specific pattern of these fasteners was almost like a fingerprint that identified the nationality of the builder. Below the waterline, ships of this era faced a constant enemy that had nothing to do with pirates or naval warfare. Shipworms, specifically a species called Teredo navalis, are saltwater clams that bore into submerged wood and can destroy a hull in a matter of months. In tropical waters like the Caribbean, these organisms were devastating. One common defense was to sheath the hull below the waterline with sacrificial planking, essentially a second layer of wood that the worms would eat through before reaching the structural hull beneath. More advanced ships used lead or copper sheathing, though copper sheathing did not become widespread until later in the 18th century. Archaeological evidence from the Queen Anne's Revenge wreck site includes fragments of copper sheathing and lead patches, suggesting that either the French or Blackbeard himself invested in protecting the hull from marine organisms. Those lead patches also tell us something about the ship's condition. They were used to repair holes and damage, which means the hull had already taken a beating by the time it reached the waters of North Carolina. The rigging of a three-masted frigate like Queen Anne's Revenge was a complex system of masts, yards, sails, and hundreds of individual lines. The three masts, foremast, mainmast, and mizzenmast, each carried multiple sails. The mainmast was the tallest, rising perhaps 80 to 90 feet above the waterline, and it carried the largest sails, which provided the majority of the ship's driving force. The foremast, slightly shorter, carried sails that helped with steering and balance. The mizzenmast at the stern typically carried a lateen sail, a triangular sail that allowed the ship to point closer to the wind. Operating this rig required an enormous crew, and Blackbeard maintained roughly 300 men aboard the Queen Anne's Revenge and his accompanying sloops. The standing rigging, the fixed lines that held the masts in place, included shrouds running from the mast tops down to the hull on either side, and stays running fore and aft. The running rigging, the lines used to raise, lower, and adjust the sails, included halyards, sheets, braces, and dozens of other specialized lines. Every single one of these had to be maintained, replaced when worn, and adjusted constantly, as wind conditions changed. French frigates of this period were renowned for their sailing characteristics. They could point closer to the wind than most English ships, meaning they could sail at a narrower angle relative to the wind direction. This gave them a significant tactical advantage in chase situations, whether pursuing a prize or fleeing from a warship. Blackbeard would have recognized this capability immediately when he captured La Concorde, and it would have been one of the primary reasons he chose to keep her rather than stripping her and moving on. But speed alone does not explain why Queen Anne's Revenge was so effective. Blackbeard understood something about naval combat that tends to get lost in the Hollywood version of piracy. In the early 18th century, very few engagements between pirates and merchant ships actually involved prolonged fighting. The goal was intimidation. You wanted the other ship to surrender before a single shot was fired, because actual combat was messy, unpredictable, and could damage the very cargo you were trying to steal. A 40-gun frigate flying a black flag with a crew of 300 was, in most cases, enough to convince a merchant captain that resistance was pointless. Blackbeard's entire strategy was built around the psychology of fear, and Queen Anne's Revenge was the physical embodiment of that strategy. The ship's appearance would have been deliberately terrifying. While the popular image of pirate ships festooned with skulls is mostly Hollywood fantasy, Blackbeard did fly a menacing flag. Contemporary descriptions mention a black flag featuring a horned skeleton piercing a bleeding heart with a spear, though there is some debate about the exact design. What is certain is that the sight of a large, heavily armed frigate bearing down on you with that flag snapping in the wind would have been enough to make most sailors reach for the white flag instead of their weapons. The culmination of Queen Anne's Revenge as a weapon of terror came in May of 1718, when Blackbeard pulled off arguably the most audacious act in the entire history of piracy. Stop for a second. What you just heard about the Pirate Code is the part that rewrites everything you thought you knew. But it only lands when you see the actual shares, the exact fractions written into the Articles of Agreement, the punishments, the port records, the names of the men who funded them from government offices. It's all in the Black Flag Codex, linked in the description. 5 seconds, grab it now, because what comes next builds directly on it. Link is below. QR code is on your screen. He sailed his flotilla, consisting of Queen Anne's Revenge and 3 smaller sloops, directly into the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina, one of the wealthiest and most important ports in British North America, and blockaded it. If you trace this route on a map, starting from the Eastern Caribbean, where Blackbeard had been raiding for months, you can follow his path north through the Bahamas and up the coast of the American colonies. He passed the Ternate Islands in the Bay of Honduras, captured additional sloops along the way, picked up a Spanish vessel off Cuba, and threaded through the Bahamas before making his approach to Charleston from the south. This was not a random act of aggression. It was a calculated military operation. For nearly a week, Blackbeard's fleet controlled all maritime traffic in and out of Charleston Harbor. They seized several ships attempting to enter or leave the port. They took hostages, including Samuel Wragg, a member of the Governor's Council. And then Blackbeard sent a message to the city with a demand that would have seemed absurd coming from anyone else. He did not want gold. He did not want jewels. He wanted a chest of medicine. His crew was riddled with venereal disease, likely syphilis, and the treatment at the time required mercury-based compounds that were expensive and difficult to obtain. A urethral syringe recovered from the Queen Anne's Revenge wreck site, bearing a control mark indicating manufacture in Paris between 1707 and 1715, confirms that medical treatment was a real and urgent concern aboard the ship. The engineering implications of this blockade are worth considering. Charleston Harbor sits behind a series of barrier islands and sandbars that create a natural bottleneck. Any ship entering or leaving the port has to navigate a relatively narrow channel. Blackbeard positioned Queen Anne's Revenge to control this choke point, using his 40 guns to create a killing field that no merchant vessel could survive. The 3 sloops provided mobile screening forces that could chase down any ship trying to slip past. It was textbook naval strategy, the kind of operation you might expect from a trained military commander, not a pirate. Charleston's governor, Robert Johnson, had no naval force capable of challenging Blackbeard. The city was essentially defenseless. After several tense days, Johnson sent the medicine. Blackbeard released the hostages, though not before stripping them of their valuables and most of their clothing, and sailed north. A contemporary account noted that this feat struck a great terror to the whole province of Carolina. The most powerful maritime force in the Western Hemisphere at that moment was not a nation's navy. It was a pirate with a repurposed slave ship. What happened next is one of the great mysteries of pirate history. Barely 3 weeks after his triumph at Charleston, Blackbeard sailed his fleet toward Topsail Inlet, now called Beaufort Inlet, on the coast of North Carolina. If you look at an early 18th century map of this coastline, you can see why this was a dangerous approach. The inlet was shallow and narrow, just 12 feet deep at low tide and perhaps 16 feet at high tide. The navigable channel was barely 100 feet wide. 3 sloops made it through successfully, but Queen Anne's Revenge, drawing significantly more water than the sloops, ran hard aground on a sandbar. Blackbeard ordered the captain of the sloop Adventure to come back and attempt to kedge the flagship off the bar, a process that involves running an anchor out ahead of the grounded ship and using the capstan to winch the vessel forward. But Adventure also ran aground, roughly a gunshot's distance from Queen Anne's Revenge. Both vessels were stuck. Now, here is where the story gets suspicious. Several historians believe Blackbeard ran the ship aground deliberately. The reasoning is compelling. By this point, Blackbeard had over 300 crew members who all expected a share of the accumulated plunder. That is a lot of mouths to feed and a lot of shares to divide. By accidentally losing his flagship, Blackbeard had an excuse to downsize. He transferred his most trusted men and the best of the treasure onto a small, captured Spanish sloop. He left roughly 17 crew members stranded on a sandy bank, a league from the mainland, with no boat, no provisions, and no way off. Those men would have died if Stede Bonnet, another pirate captain, had not happened to sail past and rescue them. If Blackbeard did ground Queen Anne's Revenge on purpose, it was a cold-blooded but strategically brilliant move. He eliminated the expense of maintaining a large warship, reduced his crew to a manageable number, kept the bulk of the treasure for himself, and positioned himself to accept the king's pardon from North Carolina's governor, Charles Eden, which he did shortly afterward. The engineering of the ship's destruction, if it was intentional, was as calculated as its construction. Queen Anne's Revenge settled into the sand and sediment of Beaufort Inlet and remained there for 278 years. The harsh saltwater environment consumed most of the wooden structure. Marine organisms ate through planking and frames. Storms shifted the wreck and scattered artifacts across the ocean floor. By the time the ship was rediscovered in 1996, there was no recognizable hull sitting on the seabed. What remained was a debris field roughly 200 feet long and 75 feet wide, with cannons, anchors, and thousands of artifacts either embedded in the sand or encased in concretions, those rock-hard masses of sand, shells, and coral that form around iron objects in seawater. The discovery came on the 21st of November, 1996, when a team from Intersal Inc., a private research firm, located the wreck using historical research compiled by the company's president, Phil Masters, and maritime archaeologist David Moore from the North Carolina Maritime Museum. The site sits in roughly 28 feet of water, about 1 mile offshore from Fort Macon State Park near Atlantic Beach, North Carolina. But finding the wreck was only the beginning. Confirming that it was actually Queen Anne's Revenge took years of painstaking archaeological work. The evidence accumulated slowly. There were more cannons than you would expect on a merchant vessel. The cannons were of different makes and nationalities, consistent with a pirate's scavenged arsenal. Many were found loaded and ready to fire. Depth markings on the surviving stern post were measured in French feet, not English feet, confirming French construction. A bronze bell recovered from the site bore the date 1705. Markings on a cannon matched the early 18th century dating. Then came the artifacts that sealed the identification. A brass coin weight bearing the bust of Queen Anne, cast during her reign between 1702 and 1714. The stem of a wine glass decorated with tiny diamonds and embossed crowns, made to commemorate the 1714 coronation of King George I, Queen Anne's successor. The remains of a French hunting sword featuring a bust closely resembling King Louis XV, who claimed the French throne in 1715. And that urethral syringe from Paris with a control mark dating its manufacture between 1707 and 1715. Every single artifact pointed to a ship that was active in the right time period, built by the right country, and carrying the eclectic mix of international goods you would expect from a pirate vessel. In August of 2011, the National Geographic Society reported that the state of North Carolina had officially confirmed the shipwreck as Queen Anne's Revenge. The archaeological recovery has been one of the longest-running and most productive maritime excavations in American history. Since 1996, more than 400,000 individual artifacts have been recovered from the site. That number sounds staggering, and it is. But it includes everything from massive cannons weighing over a ton each to tiny fragments of glass, wood, and metal. The work has been conducted primarily by the Underwater Archaeology Branch of the North Carolina Department of Cultural Resources, with support from East Carolina University, where a dedicated conservation laboratory was established to process and preserve the recovered material. The conservation process itself is a feat of engineering. Iron artifacts pulled from saltwater are extremely fragile. The seawater has replaced much of the original iron with corrosion products, and exposure to air can cause rapid deterioration. Each artifact must be desalinated, stabilized, and sometimes reconstructed before it can be studied or displayed. The anchors, which weigh over 3,000 pounds each and measure more than 11 feet long and 7 feet across, required specialized lifting equipment just to bring them to the surface. Once in the lab, they were placed in enormous vats where they will soak for years as the salt is slowly extracted. The cannons tell their own engineering story. Recovered examples from England and Sweden span roughly 75 years of manufacturing, from about 1640 to 1714. This means Blackbeard was mounting guns on Queen Anne's Revenge that were, in some cases, nearly 80 years old when the ship went down. Cannon technology did not evolve rapidly in this period, but older guns were more prone to metal fatigue, corrosion, and unpredictable failure. Firing an 80-year-old cannon was a calculated risk. The fact that 9 of the recovered guns were found loaded tells us that Blackbeard's crew accepted this risk as a cost of doing business. Among the artifacts are items that reveal the daily life aboard a pirate ship in ways that no written account can match. German stoneware jugs that held rum, brandy, and water. French earthenware dishes. English glass stemware, probably reserved for the captain's table. Pewter plates and silver spoons. Glass bottles that once contained wine and gin. A single fragment of a Chinese porcelain teapot lid, suggesting that someone aboard enjoyed tea. Ceramic tobacco pipes and lead gaming markers hint at how the crew passed time between engagements. The darker side of the ship's history is also present in the archaeological record. Iron shackles, the kind used to restrain enslaved people during the Middle Passage, were recovered from the site. Tiny fragments of African gold jewelry and gold dust point to the human cargo that La Concorde carried before Blackbeard captured her. Glass trade beads and copper beads, items used in the exchange of human beings on the coast of West Africa, are part of the collection. These artifacts serve as a powerful reminder that Queen Anne's Revenge was not just a pirate ship. Before it became an instrument of terror on the high seas, it was an instrument of something far worse. The wreck site itself has posed ongoing engineering challenges for the archaeological team. Located just a mile offshore in relatively shallow water, the site is exposed to storms, shifting currents, and the constant movement of sand that can bury artifacts one season and expose them the next. Divers work in 5-foot by 5-foot squares, using pneumatic chisels to free objects from concretion and water induction dredges that function like underwater vacuum cleaners, connected to sluices aboard the research vessel that sift out small artifacts the divers might have missed. Work proceeds slowly and carefully, because every artifact needs to be documented in its original position before removal. One of the most challenging features of the site is what archaeologists have called the pile, a massive concretion of artifacts in the midships region of the wreck. This jumbled mass of cannons, iron fittings, personal items, and structural remains is the most methodologically difficult portion of the entire site, requiring the team to work with extreme precision to avoid destroying one artifact while freeing another. As of the most recent reports, roughly 60% of the site has been excavated, and many recovered artifacts are still in the conservation laboratory awaiting processing. The work continues, though it has been complicated at times by legal disputes between the state of North Carolina, the discovering company Intersol, and various other stakeholders over ownership and commercial rights to the artifacts. What has been recovered already paints a picture that goes far beyond the popular image of Blackbeard as a one-dimensional villain. The medical instruments suggest a crew that dealt with real health crises. The navigational equipment shows that someone aboard was a skilled navigator. The variety of personal items, from shoe buckles to buttons to straight pins, tells us that these were real people living real lives, even if those lives involved robbery, kidnapping, and the occasional blockade of a major colonial city. The story of Queen Anne's Revenge is ultimately a story about transformation. A ship built by French craftsmen in a port city known for its role in the slave trade, converted from a privateer to a merchant vessel to a slave ship, and back again as the political winds shifted. Captured by a pirate who recognized its potential and rebuilt it into a weapon that could challenge the maritime power of entire colonial governments. Grounded and abandoned in a shallow inlet off the coast of North Carolina, either by accident or by design, and then resurrected, nearly 3 centuries later, by archaeologists and conservators who have spent decades pulling it piece by piece from the ocean floor. Every timber, every cannon, every corroded nail tells part of that story. The French fastening patterns speak to the skill of the shipwrights in Nantes. The mismatched guns speak to Blackbeard's ability to improvise and adapt. The lead patches speak to a hull that had been pushed hard and repaired often. The shackles speak to a history that we cannot ignore, no matter how much the romance of piracy tries to obscure it. The ship that terrorized the Atlantic for 7 months in 1717 and 1718 was not magic. It was not luck. It was engineering, applied with ruthless intelligence by a man who understood that the most important weapon in naval warfare is not the cannon. It is the ship itself. And 300 years after Queen Anne's revenge settled into the sand of Beaufort Inlet, the sand is still giving her back, one artifact at a time.